anywhere in the state of Kansas, and it would have allowed foreign companies to come in without any kind of restriction whatsoever. Now, it's primarily local. Through your county commission, you can still either agree to have those companies come in or decide not to. The Sierra Club has also been very active. They are not so interested in workers, but they are interested in environmental issues, and so there has been a fair amount of cooperation between environmental groups and people primarily concerned with workers.
I grew up on a farm where the manure went onto the pasture, onto the fields, and it was balanced. What you're talking about sounds like a huge amount of animal waste.
In a small space.
In a small space that only has very limited use. How are they managing that excess? What are they doing with it?
Year after year.
Well, the problem is, I mean, if you may remember hysteria
yeah.
On the eastern shore of Maryland with the fish kills, that's a direct result of, there are many causes, and among them fertilizing our lawns, but it also, because of the poultry industry as we know it began on the eastern shore of Maryland and Virginia and Delaware. To put on, in a feed yard, each animal in that feed yard eats 30 pounds of grain a day, and she or he poops 27 pounds a day. And so it puts on about 3 pounds a day. And so and chickens are the most efficient, but they will produce, a 5-pound bird will produce 5 pounds of solid waste.
So are those animal wastes going into commercial fertilizers that we're buying at hardware stores and that sort of thing?
Yes.
That's being...
Some of it will go into commercial fertilizer. Some of it, a lot of it is spread on the ground, so they will either give it away or sell it.
Right.
And it tends to be concentrated within, well, the farmer who has those houses will spread it on his fields, or he will sell it or give it to people who are nearby. So
does it end up balanced like my own?
No, it's not balanced, because if you could take all of the chicken poop that was generated in Kentucky, there are five slaughterhouses in Kentucky, and spread it across the whole state, it'd be fine. But in fact, that chicken production is limited to the western part of the state, and so that chicken poop goes into a limited area. And that increases the problems with runoff, there have been a number of studies that have found that increased problems with human health, with people who work in or live near confined animal operations.
Right.
Much of that research has been done in Iowa with hogs, right. But there's good solid evidence that that is harmful to people who live in the area, both in terms of water pollution, also in terms of air pollution.
With the large amounts of antibiotics being used, don't we risk the development of organisms that will be extremely hard to control?
Absolutely. And
we're concerned about that with humans, but
well, it's also because those little bugs are becoming more resistant, and things like penicillin are less and less useful because those little creatures are evolving.
Yes.
Absolutely, and so there has been a very strong push to take non-therapeutic use of antimicrobials and antibiotics out of production. So what happens is the feed that's given to these birds has antibiotics, antimicrobials in it to increase growth and to keep them from getting sick. I mean, you know, it's 27,000 creatures in a house that's not much bigger than not as big as a football field. About 500 feet long.
Ideal for an epidemic.
Absolutely. And there is now pig diarrhea that is a major, it's killed about 1 million pigs just recently in the United States. There is great concern about that disease, and probably our bacon is hasn't affected the price yet, but it will. I should say that, no, you haven't asked me, but I'll tell you, I love meat. And I eat meat with great gusto. But I don't necessarily eat meat from certain sources. But just truth in advertising. I'm not anti-meat at all, far from it. But there is this pig diarrhea that's really, really scaring the bejesus out of pork producers right now.
Well, haven't there been outbreaks of
Yes, there have been outbreaks of avian flu, absolutely. This pig diarrhea, it's affecting young animals right now, is the current concern.
Right.
But there have been, I used to be able to, well, there was a picture of me in a chicken house that you saw. I used to be able to go into chicken houses without any, people weren't concerned about it. But it's harder and harder because of the concern about carrying in diseases. You can't walk into a hog house without taking all of your clothes off, getting bathed, putting on, you look like you're going into a nuclear plant after a disaster, and then you come out, you have to bathe. Hogs and humans share many of the same diseases, and so it's very, very difficult. I mean, they're very concerned about humans carrying diseases to the animals, and of course vice versa. The pig diarrhea does not affect humans. It's not going to cause any problems for humans, but it does show the problems of raising lots of animals in confinement. Yes, sir.
I've been hearing lately ads for Hy-Vee on, of all things, local sports talk radio in Kansas City, saying that they're getting some of not necessarily all, but some of their beef from grass-fed operations in the Flint Hills. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it does kind of beg the question, is there much going on in the way of grass-fed operations in Kansas, where I think the Flint Hills is kind of ideal for that?
There's a growing number of folks that are producing grass-fed and that are marketing under their own brands. And Flint Hills is one area. There is a guy up in St. Francis, Mike Calicrate, who's the president of OCM, who has been a pioneer in moving in this direction. He brought suit against IBP a number of years ago, and came because of preferential treatment in terms of purchases and unfairness to certain producers. So his is Ranch Direct Foods, and you can go on the web and order his meat. So it's growing. It is, of course, it's not cheap. It's not necessarily easy to find it, but it's out there and it's growing. Now, what has happened is that some of those companies, Laura's Lean Beef, she was one out of Kentucky. She was one of the first to get that kind of boutique beef. It's been bought out. So as those companies get successful, the big players are very often buying them up, which is what's happened with organic as well. So good for Laura, I guess, but not necessarily good for us as consumers who may be concerned about this concentration.
It just seems like you can get larger chains involved, like I just think grocery chains.
Yes.
To start buying this, that would increase demand, and it also exposes people to the idea of getting local. And lastly,
but yes, that's true. But let me just say, what we have done is we have dismantled the infrastructure so that we used to have slaughterhouses, little bitty slaughterhouses all over the country. Most of those are gone. And so the problem with this is those folks getting their product processed. And that's a big challenge.
Yeah. Well, and lastly, it seems like if you had more humane methods of production, like grass-fed beef, wouldn't that kind of take care of a lot of the worker safety issues? I don't know, maybe I'm just being idealistic, like the gentleman talking about pastoral scenes, I'm looking at cowboys, riding horses and rounding up the cows out there on the range, as opposed.
They're still doing it. I showed you a picture of Arthur County.
Yeah, and you do have the danger of falling off a horse or something, but it just seems like you spread the operation out like that, it somehow becomes safer for the workers. I don't know.
But those cowboys out there on the range, they've got to sell their product and until there are viable alternative slaughterhouses.
Yeah.
That's the real problem now.
That's what
Now
it's
there are the emergence of mobile slaughter facilities. Mike Calicrate is another one. There are some for poultry, but those are still, you know, just a few animals, and so they will go to the ranch or wherever it is, and you can slaughter them there. But we don't have this infrastructure that would allow significant alternatives. And until we do, that's a serious problem, and
so
one
the
that
argument-
nobody has really been able to quite figure out yet.
I don't listen to the news as carefully as I should sometimes. And a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, there was a news item about chickens increasingly being processed in China. Why was that an item of news that has anything?
Because they're
changed?
processing their own instead of buying ours. And so that's probably, I didn't hear the story.
I'm sorry.
But China has moved increasingly to developing its own industrial production of pork and poultry.
So
It's unlikely that, well, there is a certain amount of offshore movement of animal products, but it's unlikely that we're going to see a lot of that moved elsewhere because we have a stable government, we have good roads, we don't pay our workers very much, and so, you know, moving cattle slaughter to China or Mexico is not as likely. Poultry is a little more, a lot of that, we sell a lot of poultry. We sell a lot of beef and poultry and pork overseas. We buy a lot. So a lot of the beef that we eat here isn't from the United States. It's from Australia or New Zealand or Canada or Mexico. I mean, we're talking about worldwide distribution systems. And so the plants that, you know, when Jennifer and I were living in Garden City this fall, we ate hamburgers a lot. And probably those hamburgers didn't come from Kansas. They probably came from a long way away.
So all the people politically who think you're nuts and your presentation is hogwash, their response.
They're right.
Right. Their response to you is, well, that's the price of capitalism. Is that their response?
This is an unusual audience for me.
Right.
Most of the, I mean that as a compliment. Most of the audiences that I present my work to will end up talking about what I eat for dinner and about the food,
right.
You know, about that. And I don't mean to minimize that.
Right.
But this audience has focused much more on issues relating to the human cost of our food, and I commend you all for those concerns. Slaughterhouses, you know, are invisible to a large extent, and the workers are invisible to a large extent. There's no secret, you know, we used to, before 1960, slaughterhouses were in cities. Armourdale, Kansas City, the stockyards. They have moved out into the country to be closer to their source of supply to cut down their transportation costs. They have created boom towns like Garden City and Dodge and Liberal in Kansas. And these are all relatively small towns that didn't have enough workers to satisfy the needs of the employers. And so they have imported those workers, and those workers are, anybody that wants a job in a meat plant can have one as long as you can, you know, do the work. But there aren't enough of the locals, so they go to refugees or immigrants. Increasingly, meatpacking companies are going to refugees because they are here with authorization and because there are certain federal supports for refugees. And the federal government wants refugees off of the federal government's responsibility as quickly as possible. So packers love foreign workers because they believe they work hard They don't know their rights, or if they do, they're not likely to exercise them. And they like having plants where a lot of languages are spoken. They feel they're less likely to organize. And so they like them.
Yes, about 10 years ago, I went on a bus tour the university organized, and we went to West Kansas. And in Garden City, I believe, we went to a public school, and the signs in the school were in 3 languages.
Yeah.
English, Spanish, of course, and Vietnamese.
And now they're in more. Now they have Burmese added and Somali.
Wow, is that right?
So Vietnamese they're still Vietnamese in Garden City. There's still Vietnamese that don't speak English, but not that many. And so there are now about 1,500 Burmese in Garden, 250 or thereabouts in the schools. Somalis, we don't have a good count as yet, but there are a growing number of them. Ethiopians, Oromos as well.
Wow.
What does that do to the social structure, the schools, the police force, the communities, where they increase these?
There are now in Garden City 75% of the children in Garden City schools are of color.
Oh my.
In 1980, 18% were people of color. And so it's been a complete flip. 65% of the children in the Garden City schools are Hispanic. Those may be Mexican Americans, or they may be children of immigrants from Latin America. Also, about 75% roughly are on free or reduced lunches. So Garden, Dodge, Liberal are multicultural communities. They are rich, cosmopolitan places, but they're places whose economies are built on low-wage labor. So they're boom towns, but they're not like North Dakota. I heard a story on NPR this morning where, you know, people are getting paid $100,000 to drive a truck, but those economies are built on low-wage labor. And housing is very tight. The vacancy rate in Garden City, when Jennifer and I tried to find housing this summer, was less than 1%.
Oh my goodness.
And you probably won't pay $1,500 for a one-bedroom apartment, but you might pay $800 or $900 for one.
Are you familiar with Bossy's Best brand that was sold here at Merck? I don't know what the story is now, but a few years ago, it was a real small family farm somewhere in this area that was the smallest that had the smallest meat processing plant in the country. In fact, they were telling me that, I don't know if it was USDA or who it was, that had different categories of plant, and there was only one in the smallest category, and that was them.
I don't know about them.
Okay.
I mean, there are lockers. I think there's one still in Eudora. There used to be anyway. So there are places, there's a place called Ershman's in Garden City. So there are those places where where you can either take your animals to be slaughtered, or you can go and purchase purchase meat.
Yeah.
They're available, but they're just not very many.
Well, this was their farm, and they were doing their own meat processing. And apparently there was nothing else that small, and they were required to have their own federal agent there full-time.
Well, if they're selling across state lines, they do. That's right. There has to be a USDA.
It's time to
I'm
conclude.
ready to stop whenever you are.
And are you available to stay and ask or respond to other questions?
Yeah, I've got a meeting at 1:30, but I'm just 20
I've
minutes
been
away.
totally amazed at how knowledgeable you are. You have devoted a hell of a lot of years to this. I can see that already.
I have.
Thank you.
And we are in your debt.
I have a long learning curve. It takes me a long time to.
I do too. That's why the Lord keeps me around. Maybe I'll finally get it.